Joan has got a question for us. Joan is in Batemans Bay, which is in the seat of Gilmore, Labor's most marginal, and one that is absolutely on the line on Saturday. Your question for Peter Dutton, mate.
Labor and the Greens have allegedly been discussing bringing in a death and inheritance tax. Is there a possibility that you would venture down this pathway if elected to government during your term?
Joan, I think we need to have a serious discussion about what is at risk at this election in terms of taxes. Prime Minister went into the last election saying there'd be no changes in relation to superannuation. We now find out that that's changed. The government has, as you're aware, a tax on unrealised capital gains. That means, in lay terms, if you've got shares, the shares go up in value. Even though you haven't sold the shares, you're going to pay tax on that paper profit. So in some cases, people haven't got the cash to pay that, because it's like saying to a salaried employee, to a doctor or a nurse or a policeman or a taxi driver, well, you're going to have to pay the tax before you get paid the wage this week. For a business, they're going to have to pay for a valuation if they've got a farm, for example, in their self-managed super fund, or if you're a delicatessen, or if you're a mechanic and you've got a workshop in your superannuation fund, and that goes up through the course of the year, you're going to have to pay for a valuation. And what happens if the share market turns down next year and the shares are worth less than what they were valued at the year prior, even though you haven't sold them? So I think the government's created an enormous mess here. It is, in essence, an inheritance tax, because it's taking money away from people before they can access it for their superannuation or leave it to their children. And it goes beyond that. The government has done research, as we know. The Prime Minister doesn't want to acknowledge this, but the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, has commissioned the work in Treasury for negative gearing to be abolished and for the capital gains discount to be abolished as well. And of course, that is the first demand of the Greens in negotiations with Anthony Albanese after the election. And I think there is a lot at risk at this election in relation to new taxes that are likely to be imposed by a Labor Greens government. And I think we provide stability, and we've given assurances around no changes to negative gearing. Right from the very first day of announcement, we said that we wouldn't support Labor's proposal to tax unrealised capital gains. We've been consistent in that, and we always manage the economy more effectively than Labor, and we do it in relation to stopping these taxes, and we'll do whatever we can to stop Labor from imposing the negative gearing changes, because it'll drive up rents, it'll make it harder for young kids to get into housing, and it'll make it creates an aspect of sovereign risk where people don't want to invest into housing, which is the last thing we need at the moment.
When you mentioned Jim Chalmers, yes, there was modelling, right? There's no question about it. Jim Chalmers himself had eventually come to admit that last year. But when he was advocating in the 2019 election as the Shadow Finance Minister, he was saying that a housing policy without changes to negative gearing or capital gains tax has a hole in it. Now, we've seen the Prime Minister wants to talk about what you said 10 years ago. They've even Frankenstein quotes in order to invent, and that was the early part of the election. Yeah. But if we know that that's what he believes, then that's what he believes.
Of course he believes that. The Labor Party believe in an inheritance tax every day of the week, Paul. It's part of their socialist agenda. They believe that you've got too much money and the person next door to you hasn't got enough, and how do we find a way to tax you? Look at Labor in Victoria. I mean, they've near destroyed the economy in Victoria. And again, if somebody has an approval on a block of land, or a farmer has an approval to develop that block of land, if the zoning changes and the value of the land goes up, you're taxed. And this is a quasi-inheritance tax, and call it for what it is. I mean, that's the reality of it.
Yeah, all right. Plenty of other questions. We go from Batemans Bay. Let's go to Geelong in Victoria, where we've got Jeff, who's got a question. Jeff, what's your question for the alternative Prime Minister, for Peter Dutton?
Thank you for the opportunity. Mr. Dutton, as a Navy veteran, I fully support and thank you for your courageous decision to finally increase funding to the Defence Force, which is needed to protect our great nation. A major shortfall that needs to be considered, though, is encouraging our young men and women to join our services. Yep. A possible reason for young people not wanting to enlist is the treatment of our past Defence Force personnel. So my question is, part of the defence budget going to speed up needed services to the men and women who have served our nation?
Jeff, thank you very much for your question. I think it's incredibly important. And as Defence Minister, I was very acutely aware of the treatment of some of our veterans, which had been appalling, and we tried to rectify some of those issues. We've got Barnaby Joyce, as you know, who's very passionate in this area and very determined to provide justice and support to veterans, and that'll be backed up with money as well. And I believe very strongly, I've made this comment publicly in the last couple of days, but the highlight of the campaign so far for me was going to the RSL in Townsville with Phil Thompson and hanging out there with some of the vets who were, just young blokes and young women who were just amazing. And it filled me with pride. I thought that we wouldn't take care of them, whether they got injured in active duty or in warlike conditions, or if they were just injured in training, is completely unacceptable. So I do want to make sure that we've got a better situation for our veterans. That requires funding, there's no question about that, and I want to make sure that it's an attractive place to continue to work, because the separation rate is way too high, and we invest a lot of money in people to train them up to be the best in the world, and then we're happy to see them go out the door after 3 or 4 or 6 years service. That's not something that we should tolerate, and we should provide every encouragement for people to stay on, but in addition to that, make it more attractive for other young Australians to look at it as a positive career. And when they speak to the former diggers, for them to tell them, actually, you get taken care of, and it's a good job. So I think it's a really good point you make.
You like it? No clocks on the screen, no music playing you off, just a chance to actually answer questions from the good people of Australia.